Hi ICA, I'm Eric Moore, one of the elders here at the church, and today I'd like to share with you a few thoughts from Jesus' last words on the cross as we celebrate this Passion Week, looking forward to tomorrow, a celebration in our risen Lord with the Orthodox Easter. So I'm going to look at the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 30. And it says, "When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, 'It is finished.' And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit." And it's interesting to note that as the gospel was written in Greek as the original language, the phrase "it is finished" in the Greek is actually only one word. And I'll attempt to pronounce it, the word tetelestai. And that is a term that is often seen in accounting procedures, meaning that the account is paid in full. And so when Jesus proclaims this from the cross, it's very interesting to note the additional meaning in this, that it is finished, meaning his ministry or his work on earth leading up to that point, that was finished, or that the entire Old Testament covenant is coming to an end, that it is finished, it is being paid in full. Jesus tells us in the Last Supper that he holds up the cup and he says, "This is a new covenant in my blood." It's also interesting to note that there's a transactional aspect that's going on here. Jesus understands that a substitution is happening, that he's putting himself in place of us, of the people who are close to him, and all those who would place their faith in him throughout history. This idea of the substitutionary payment, it reminds me of a while ago last year, my wife and I had made our last student loan debt payment. And when we made that final payment, it was interesting how even though we had been tracking our progress all the way up to that point, getting closer and closer to the goal of paying off that debt, when we made that final payment and it was done, it was complete, it changed our perspective, like almost in an instant. And it went from having this just kind of this very narrow vision of our financial possibilities or our financial future. And then once we made that last payment, just like everything was opened. And we could see and we could think differently about our finances and about our goals. And about where we stood in terms of that debt and being free from that. And so how much more is it in our lives as we recognize the magnitude of our sin and just the implications of the choices that we make, and having to be accountable to a righteous God for those things. But yet we read and we have our hope that Jesus made that final payment, that he said it is finished, that this transactional relationship that was established in the Old Testament with the sacrificial system, where we commit sin and then there's a sacrifice that's made as restitution. These transactions, it's paid in full, it's done. And we're free to enjoy a relational covenant with God. In 1 Peter, Peter writes on this same idea, and it's chapter 1, verse 18. It says, "Knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers." Okay, so he's talking about the sacrificial system. "And ransomed not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot." And so as we contemplate these words, "it is finished," we can have joy and hope in a completely different perspective of who we are before God. That there's no longer this transitional aspect that we have to do enough good to somehow win his favor, but that because Jesus has made a complete and total payment once and for all time, that we can have so much joy in that. And so as we look forward to the celebration of the risen Lord tomorrow, I just pray that this idea of the finality and the totality of what Christ has done on the cross can just be something that washes over you and just becomes a point of joy for your life and for as you worship, as you just contemplate on who God is and who we are before a loving and righteous Father.